mercenary, hunter-warrior, motorball player, singer, agent, assassin, hero, gladiator. Throughout the Battle Angel Alita story, we as a reader get to see her take on many different professions, but despite it all, we cherish her for her persona, her spirit, the values that she believes in, and the things that she holds dear, such as courage, loyalty, honor, empathy, love, tenacity. Those are the values that make up this character Alita, and despite the various stories and the various situations that she encounters, we get to cherish her and honor her for the different personas that she has. And like a lot of different stories, she does evolve through different personalities, and through that you could say that she has multiple personas throughout the story. However, Battle Angel Alita takes it one step further in that not only are there multiple personalities, but I would say that there are multiple identities that she encounters. And because of that, it makes this story very unique in portraying the main character in ways that you don't see in other comics, animes, or even live-action movies. And so what I wanted to do today was to talk about the different faces of Alita, how she has multiple identities, and as a reader and our point of view, we sometimes can identify these identities as Alita, but sometimes we'll also forget that many of these identities which we may not identify as Alita also has a foundation in her spirit. So what's up, people, and welcome to another Battle Angel Alita / GUNNM video. And for today, I would like to talk about the many faces of Alita. And it is one of those things that I find very interesting about this story, and one of those things which makes me really like this story very much. It gives it depth because of the fact that it shows how identity can be questioned and identified in different manners, and depending upon your point of view, you may attach to these identities in different ways as well. Now, as you can imagine, I will be talking about a lot of the characters and the main character as she progresses down the story, and because of that, I would like to give my default spoiler alert. If you have not read Battle Angel Alita, at least up to the end of Last Order, then I would suggest that you may want to consider turning off this video if you do not want to be spoiled, since I will be talking about a lot of her character as she progresses down the storyline. However, if you are okay with it, and if you do want to know a little bit more about how Alita evolves in the future, and what I mean by identity, then I would be happy to have you join us for this discussion. In any case, that's my spoiler alert, and as always, please watch at your discretion. So the ambiguity in identity is one of those techniques that you often see in storytelling. Even in cinemas, you often see that in many movies, such as The Manchurian Candidate, The Light and Dark Side, or the Anakin Skywalker versus Darth Vader of Star Wars, Jason Bourne, and even The Sixth Sense, where the character or the main character, has that reveal at the very end that questions his identity. And Battle Angel Alita is no different than that, in that right from the get-go, the main character does have an identity crisis, similar to Jason Bourne, She wakes up with no memory of her past, and because of that, everything that happens in the future from that point on is a new character that she has to build. But unlike Jason Bourne, whose world, after he wakes up and has no memories, very similar to the world that he was in before, except that he's kind of switched sides. Alita's world is a very different world from what she had in the beginning, as we find out later. And because of that, Alita's persona becomes a much more different personality than that of her previous life, which I will call Yoko. And by this alone, and using this technique, and having Alita slowly learn about her past, which is very different in persona to who she is now, the author can provide that complexity, the conflict in personality. Which one is really Alita? Now, of course, since the previous one is Yoko, you could somehow, through your point of view, think of them as two different people, but in fact, they are the same people, or the same person. And so the constant question keeps on coming up, which is the real persona of Alita? And this has been shown in other entertainment mediums as well. The one that comes up in my mind is something like Final Fantasy VII, where Cloud Strife, of course, later on finds out that he is not exactly the perfect soldier that he originally thinks he is in the beginning of the game. But this one goes further than that. And although there is already enough complexity between the original character of Yoko versus the new character of Alita, Yukito Kishiro takes it one step further because he, in general, questions identity and humanity throughout this entire story. And because he does that in a general manner, whether it's through the eyes of somebody like Doc Ido or Zalem in general, he also shows it through the experiences of Alita. And so Yukito Kishiro uses multiple different facets of identity and self-reflection to give this story and this character a tremendous amount of complexity, something that you would typically not see in a shonen comic or superhero comic. One of them is, of course, the moral ambiguity of the character and the strong amount of self-reflection that the character does. When you combine that with the karma that the story gives, then there's a tremendous amount of questioning and reviewing of the character through the actions that she's done in the past, as well as the things that she does during the story. And that gives both the character and the reader a tremendous amount of depth and the ability to look at things in multiple different points of view. However, then Yukito Kishiro combines that with multiple personalities that Alita has through, her amnesia and the conflict that she has between various personas. One is the side that she has in empathy, the one that wants to help out as much as possible, and the care that she gives. One is the fear that she often has in the life that she does, either in the fear of the surroundings or the fear of herself in turning into the monster that she doesn't want to be. And of course, the final one is the brutality, the monster that she can become if she unleashes it. If you want to call it her id, that will be fine. And so she has a tremendous amount of aggression that she can unleash if she wanted to. And this self-reflection between the peaceful, passive side that she wants to be versus the aggressive side that constantly keeps coming up through the multiple personalities that she has makes it even more complex. But then, of course, Yukito Kishiro takes it one step further because of the fact that this is a story about identity and humanity and the question of what exactly that is. And of course, we know that the world of Battle Angel Alita is about cyborgs and cybernetics and mechanics and humanity and genetics. And so we see a tremendous different variety of what we might call humans or life entities. You know, everything from somebody who's completely human, like Figure 4, at least in the beginning parts of the series, to somebody who might have just one limb that may be cybernetic, like Nurse Gerhardt, to somebody who's completely, cybernetic except their brain, like, the Alita that you see in the movie or the first chapters of the series, to somebody who is much more computer-like entity because their brain has been replaced with a computer chip, such as Ido, right? And so there's tremendous amounts of what you might identify as life. And because of that, there's tremendous amounts of what you might question as what is life? Who am I? And yet Yukito Kishiro does it in a very subtle manner in the sense that he tries to stay away from the long monologue of what is human or what is life or who am I and am I real sort of thing. There are little bits of it because that has to be in there during certain reveals and the persona getting conflicted in their existence. But overall, it's left up to the reader to decide how they want to interpret a lot of these things. And because of that, there's a tremendous amount of complexity and a tremendous amount of facets to which a reader can take this story in many ways. You could think of Alita as a hero. You could think of Alita as a flawed entity. You could think of Alita, if you wanted to, as a villain. And because of that, and because the story does not take judgment, but rather just reveal the persona, the complexity gives the readers a freedom to choose how they want to interpret the story. And because of that, I feel that many readers find this story to be very interesting. Now, as readers of the comic, as we keep on reading the story, we start seeing, why Alita has such a moral ambiguity in her persona. Why can somebody who is so compassionate also be so freaking brutal a lot of times? And you start understanding that through her past, in the sense that inherently she is a very friendly person, somebody of soft heart. You start seeing that when you start reading about her childhood. She is a very sweet person, and it takes a lot for her to become angry. In fact, I have not seen her be angry during her childhood so far. This is very different from, of course, the persona of Erica, who is, even at that age, she is frightening in many ways. But of course, no matter how positive or how soft you may be, when you grow up in the environment that Alita did, then you could see that she would become the Yoko of the future. And so there is two sides to her persona. One is the one that, of course, is inherent to her foundation, which is very soft and compassionate, but the other is the one that is built up out of the sheer survival in Mars and also out of the sheer understanding of exactly why she would want to be soft. She would probably ask herself, why would I want to be soft when the world around me punishes people for being that way? And survival of the fittest is constantly bashed into her head to the point where all she can sometimes think about is the fact that the only way she can move forward is to take everybody around her down. And who cares about, being compassionate? Compassionate has never helped anybody in her past life. And as such, she becomes the survivor and the mercenary that you eventually see. However, even in those times, there are times when that compassion can come up, and you could see that in her kind of back thoughts as she eventually gains the memories back. Much of it is dark, but every once in a while there is a shine of light. For example, her relationship with Gelda, so far from what we can see, is an extremely positive one. Gelda was possibly the only person who acted like Alita's mother during the time that she grew up. We don't know too much about Gelda, but one thing we know, or two things we know. One is that she's completely badass in the sense that if you pissed her off, oh my gosh, not only will she kill you, she will grind you into the ground and vaporize you into dust, you know? But the other side is that she has a very compassionate persona. And every interaction that we see between her and Alita, or her and Erica, has always been one of a very caring, almost parent sort of personality. Although she is supposed to be basically their Panzerkunst instructor, the way she teaches and the way she interacts with them is more like that of a mother. And because of that, that may have been one of the sides of compassion that Alita was able to keep alive during her early life in Mars. Now, of course, when you combine that with the compassion that Doc Ido brought out after she got resurrected, and because she didn't have her previous persona to stop her from being compassionate, that side was able to thrive a lot more in Iron City. Yes, despite the fact that Iron City was as dark as it was nothing compared to the darkness that she experienced up in Mars. And so the friendship that she received from many people, whether it's Doc Ido, Ganzu, or in the movie Nurse Gerhardt, you know, or Hugo and Koyomi and all the other people that she eventually befriends, gives her the ability to bring out that softness. And because of that, there is that interesting persona that comes out. She can be extremely hard if she wanted to, and when she needs to be, she could turn into the killer, almost a maniac killer that is necessary to keep alive. And yet, when things become soft, or when there is a need for her compassion to come out, then later as Alita, she can bring that out due to the relationships I feel that she had in Iron City. I don't think Yoko could do this. And so this is a very different persona in Alita versus Yoko, although both of them had an extreme amount of aggression. In Alita's case, that aggression was compounded by a passion, a compassion of bringing that aggression out only because of the fact that she wanted to save a lot of the people that she cared about. Whereas in Yoko's case, although we don't know, I got a feeling that it's a far, far colder individual than that of Alita. And because of that, she doesn't question her morals as much as Alita does. And so although it is the same person, it is definitely not the same persona. And it is interesting, as she gains her memory, there becomes a conflict between her old persona and her new. And as she keeps on going, she has to figure out how to be able to, come to terms with both those persona. And if coming to terms with the multiple conflicting facets of her persona wasn't complex enough, Yukito Kishiro decides to up the ante even further by creating situations external to her persona that question her existence and her identity. And there are two especially notable situations when, of course, Alita's identity gets questioned due to the circumstances that occurs. And before I start, I do want to mention once again that these are fairly strong reveals. And so if you don't want to be spoiled by the ongoing story of Battle Angel Alita original series and Battle Angel Alita Last Order, then I do want to warn people about these reveals. Okay, so the first, of course, challenge that Alita has from an external circumstance is the time when she meets the ARs, also known as the Alita Replicants. Of course, this is during the time of the Tuned Agent series. And of course, the ARs are created because of the fact that Alita, as much as she is a strong and capable tuned agent, her persona sometimes gets in the way of being able to complete the mission in a manner that Zalem and the tuned organization wants her to do it. And so they need somebody who is a lot less morally tied to their convictions. And so they create the ARs. And of course, the ARs are given the numbers, and they're given a persona that's very similar to that of Alita, with one exception. The compassion side of her is removed. And of course, even the memory of what she experienced in Iron City is removed. And because of that, you basically have the brutally efficient killing machine that has none of the moral ambiguities of the original Alita. And yet, they are not robots. They are sentient beings. And because of that, not only is their existence a challenge to Alita's identity, but Alita herself becomes a challenge to their identity. You see, basically, since they know that they are replicants, that gives question to their existence as real living beings. And the biggest challenge and example of the statement that they are not living beings is Alita herself. Her existence becomes a message to them that all they are copies of Alita. And so this, of course, creates a tremendous amount of desire for every one of the ARs to take Alita out. And so this creates this interesting challenge between both Alita and the ARs in that which one is truly Alita? And the answer is, to some extent, they all are. Although from our point of view, we view the original Alita as Alita. From a Foundation point of view, they are just as much Alita as maybe the early Yoko persona. And yet they are physically completely different beings. Now, of course, this gets even more interesting after the tuned organization goes down, because of the fact that at that point all of the ARs lose their purpose of existence. I mean, they were kind of programmed to serve tuned. So once tuned is taken out, they start losing themselves to what they need to do. And of course, this becomes very interesting because this then digresses many of the ARs to become, more aware of what they need to do. And that steers away from the original Alita persona and creates another opportunity for what Alita may have been under different circumstances. Now, of course, we see, many of them basically not be able to handle it anymore, and they take themselves out of existence. Some of them, of course, are challenged by each other and take each other out of existence. And of the ones that survive, there's basically two types of entities. And of course, one is that some of them get captured by Destinova, and Destinova turns them into his personal kind of playthings, you know. And so although they are the Foundation Alita, and they look a lot like Alita, at that point I don't think Elf and Zwolf would be really considered Alita, considering whatever personality they had in the past has been very much altered by Destinova for his satisfaction. And so, of course, Elf and Zwolf continue to come out later on in the series, but by that time their persona is so far out, I don't think Alita could ever, no matter what sort of circumstance, become that persona of Elf or Zwolf. But of course, the more interesting one is Leader Replicant number 6. Number 6 finally realized that to be able to justify her existence, she would have to basically take out every other form of Alita, including the original. And so she takes it upon herself to start taking out as many of the ARs as possible, with the goal of eventually also taking out Alita herself. Now, AR number 6 eventually goes by a German name of the same number, which of course is Zex. And of course, she changes her gender to a he. And it is interesting with regards to why that identity is created. A lot of people may think, okay, well, this is because, gender was the reason. I mean, he was more towards a male sort of persona, so she changed that gender to a male. But I don't think that is the only reason. I think the biggest reason is because of the fact that somewhere along the way, AR number 6 really had to separate her identity from Alita. And the furthest away she could think of was to transform herself into a male. And so by changing her appearance to a male, and having that male sort of persona, and changing her name from AR number 6 to Zex, she was able to completely transform herself to a completely different character. However, unlike Elf or Zwolf, who were brainwashed by Destinova, Zex is basically changed by his or her own choice. And so this may be still considered a variation of Alita. And although we get to see him in Last Order, and by the time we see him in Last Order, we think of him as a completely different entity, much of the characteristics that make up Zex is basically Alita. And so it depends on how you want to view it as a reader, and that's why I say point of view. If you think about him as the original AR number 6, you could consider him to be another variation of Alita. And yet if you keep on reading the book or the comic the way it is, it's really hard to associate him as being a variation of the girl that we come to read and love as the main character of the story. And so Yukito Kishiro does a very good job in basically giving you questions and situations with regards to identity that makes you wonder exactly at what point do you stop becoming the identity of the person you were. And of course, that question is best asked during the second situation that we encounter Alita's identity challenge. And of course, that happens during Last Order. And it happens during a time when Alita meets with Supernova for the first time. You see, up to that point, Alita was basically teaming up with Destinova to take on the likes of Trinidad and Body. And due to the circumstances, Destinova basically betrays Alita and becomes his own kind of, renegade persona that he always was in the past. And so at that point, of course, Alita not only has to deal with Embody, but has to deal with this new supernova. And the supernova tells Alita a very interesting thing. See, basically, for the people who haven't read Last Order or the original comic, there is a point at which Alita is taken out. And I won't go into the details of that. For the people who have read the comic, you know what I'm talking about. There is a point where she is taken out, and at that point she is taken up to Zalem by Destinova. And in the original series, the ending which got retconned, she is resurrected back as Alita. And of course, in Last Order, she is resurrected back as Alita again. Or so we think. You see, considering the fact that no matter how much Destinova wanted to team up with Alita, he can't stop being the kind of the satirical evil entity that he is. And so during the time that he resurrected Alita, he decided to switch out her brain with a brain chip. And so by the time we get to the middle of the story where Alita meets with Supernova, she finds out that she doesn't have a brain. And of course, the brain that is the original Alita eventually gets put into the brain array that is part of the Melchizedek. And so Alita, of course, loses her identity at that point, and we as a reader go, oh my gosh, she needs to get back her brain so that she can become the Alita, the original Alita. But of course, this creates two interesting situations. First, even if she gets her brain back, this Alita has become its own separate entity. The memories that she is now experiencing are memories that the brain Alita, the one that's now stuck in the Melchizedek as a limbo situation, is not experiencing at all. So everything that you read after that point is only experienced by the brain chip Alita. But if you take it even further, you realize that although the reveal happened right in the middle of the comic, the actual switch happened right at the very beginning when Destinova resurrected Alita, which means that all the experiences that she had in Last Order was only experienced as the brain chip Alita and not as the original Alita. Every single friendship that she gains at that point, such as with Zex, with Zazie, with the Queen Limera of Mars, every encounter she has with people like Toji, with Karula Sanguis, and even Trinidad and Body is only experienced by this Alita. And of course, as readers, we've been following this Alita. And so, who do we think is the real Alita now? If we were to take back the brain and put it into Alita, basically that completely erases everything that we as readers experienced as well. This Alita, the brain Alita, doesn't know Toji. The brain Alita doesn't know Karula Sanguis. The brain Alita never fought with Zex and Zazie. So which one do you want as the real Alita. And of course, what's interesting is, as we get to the latter part of the series, Last Order ends in a very similar manner to the original series, in that Alita becomes human again and meets with Figure 4 to live happily ever after in Earth. But of course, once again, that is the Alita with the brain in Last Order. And so if you look at the retconned ending in the original series, the Alita that becomes human is basically the Alita that we've been following with all along. But if you go to Last Order, since there was a switch with this brain chip Alita, which is kind of like another Alita replicant, the Alita that goes back to Earth is the Alita that we grew up and followed in the original series. The Alita that you saw in the movie that you loved. The Alita that you saw in the anime that you loved. The Alita that you read throughout the entire original series that you loved is that human Alita that never met Karula Sanguis, that never fought with Zex and Zizi, that never met Pingwu, that never experienced all the things that you enjoyed in Last Order. This is done by the other Alita. So once Alita gets resurrected, meets with Figure 4, and has that happy ending which we loved in the original series and happens again in Last Order, by that time, the Alita that we relate to is not that Alita. The Alita that we relate to is the brain chip Alita that experienced all that stuff, that basically saved Earth and saved Iron City by winning the Zot Championship and then somehow saving the people on the moon from the the onion frame that was traveling towards a trajectory that would crash against the moon, right? And the only way Alita could save all of this was to remain the brain chip Alita, because Merlin told her that the only way she can continue to have and control that wormhole generator and be linked to both Merlin and Zeus so that she could perform some of the most important acts to save the people of Earth as well as the lunar colonies, was to accept the fact that she would have to remain brain chip Alita for the rest of her life. And as such, she of course does so, but by doing so, she forfeits being the Alita that we first met and loved in the original series. So by the time we get to the end of Last Order, there is a dilemma not only for the character of Alita, but also for the readers, because of the fact that which one do you now call Alita? You loved the Alita in the anime and the movie and the original series so much, and yet you also cared for this Alita that went through this entire Last Order. And by the time we get to the end of Last Order, once again, the Alita that we can relate to is the Alita in the brain chip form. And the Alita that basically becomes human and goes back is somebody that we can't relate with anymore, and yet that is the Alita that we all met and loved in the first few chapters of the comic. And that I thought was brilliant by Yukito Kishiro, because of the fact that we care for Alita, we identify Alita, and yet there's two Alitas, and the one we identify is the one that we think is the original Alita, and yet it isn't the original Alita, it's a replicant. And of course, when Mars Chronicles starts, and Alita goes off to space, it's not the original Alita, right? The original Alita went back to Earth with Figure 4 in human form to live happily ever after. It is the replicant Alita that we are currently following in Mars Chronicle. And Mars Chronicle splits into two stories, one of the origin story of Alita's past and one of the current Alita. And yet the current Alita is the brain chip Alita, and the origin story is the brain Alita, and it gets completely mixed up because of the fact that you think they're the same entities. Of course, then there is the origin story that completely questions Alita's existence, because that horrifying story reveals once again something with regards to Alita's humanity. And yet you question Alita's existence due to that horrifying origin story. And even if you can consider her as a human being, that's not even the Alita that we're following at this time. And so that comes back to understanding points of view. How much are you willing to accept this current Alita as Alita? How much are you willing to accept that the original Alita was a different Alita? And which do you want to call Alita? And of course, most of us will say, yeah, I think we'll accept both as Alita. But as much as your logic and your common sense will say that, which one do you care for more? And that is an interesting perspective, and I'll leave it up to each one of you individuals to give your comment with regards to how you feel about Alita at this time. There's two Alitas, there's two main characters, and yet we really associate ourselves with a character that we didn't associate with in the beginning parts of the comic. And that is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video, because I wanted to hear your input with regards to that. So Yukito Kishiro does a very interesting job of trying to give examples of identity and personality. Alita eventually has to come to terms with Yoko, and right now Alita is in Mars to see if she can come to terms with Yoko so that she can confront Erica and get all the things done. And yet Yoko is a completely different human being from Alita. And yet she isn't, because of the fact that as Alita keeps on getting her memory back, even in brain chip form, her past is linked to the Yoko that we know that had a brain. And so this gets very complicated in terms of understanding personality, in terms of understanding identity, and there is a difference between the two that Yukito Kishiro brings out. Anyway, that is about it for this video. And I did want to go over this point because it's a very, very interesting point. And it's one of the key aspects of Battle Angel Alita that I absolutely love. Is this question, continuous question of what humanity is, what identity is, what we value in terms of a main character of a story. And do we even understand that there are questions that occur? People who read Last Order, do they realize that the character that they are following and enjoying and cheering on is a completely different character than the one that we cheered on in the original series? Okay, well, that's about it. And thank you very much for following me. I apologize for the long nature of this particular video. And yeah, if you have any comments with regards to that, I would appreciate you putting it in the comment section. And as always, I will continue on with more Battle Angel Alita, Alita Battle Angel GUNNM videos in the future, and hope you join me at that time. And this is a question, of course, that really doesn't stop now because of the fact that it is ongoing, and so it'll be interesting to see how this changes in the future. And if there is any more reveals in the future that changes this situation, I may make another video at that time with regards to this topic. But anyway, until my next Battle Angel Alita video, happy comic book reading, happy philosophy thinking, and as always, Jaya, nice day, everyone.